Hello and welcome to another Listen and Learn podcast sponsored by Volunteer Services with Hospice of Central Ohio. I'm Liz Adamschick, Manager of Volunteer Services, and I'll be your host for today. We have joining us Rick and Rosie Rieser, two of our patient companions, and we're going to be talking about their experience with our Caring Presence Vigil program. We're here with Rick and Rosie Rieser, two of our patient companion volunteers, but we're going to focus in on something that the two of you accepted the invitation to do back in 2013. I believe we're entering our fifth year, and the position or the assignment that you folks agreed to help us with is called Caring Presence. It's a vigil volunteer service that we provide for patients in the active dying process who would otherwise pass alone. But before we get into the details of that program, it'd be helpful for our listeners to know a little bit more about you. So if each of you could say a little bit about what brought you to volunteering with hospice, that's always a good place to begin.
The experience with my own mother's passing, and she passed away in a hospice facility in Columbus. And it was just a matter of a couple of days, but those days did such an impact on us that it was a feeling I couldn't shake. And shortly before I retired, I was talking to a hospice nurse who happens to go to our church. And she said, well, what are you going to do when you retire? I said, well, one of the things I'm going to look into is being a hospice volunteer. She said, well, why are you waiting? And I said, well, I haven't retired yet. And she said, well, hey, let me set you up. Next thing you know, I had an appointment. Next thing I know, I was taken to training and decided in the training that's not what I wanted to do. And then completed the training and definitely knew that was what I wanted to do. Just the caring, the caring and loving feeling that we received from other hospice volunteers 20 years before that when my mother passed away.
Right.
It carried over that long. It was just something I knew I wanted to do, didn't know if I could do it, but knew I wanted to do it.
Right.
So that's why I stuck with it.
Right. And isn't it interesting how a question as simple as what are you waiting for can open the door to so many things? It's such a profound question. We may come back to that in a minute, but thank you. I know I've heard that story so many times, but I don't know that all of our listeners have, so thank you for that. Rick, what about you? How did you get drawn into hospice volunteer work?
Well, Rosie entered the program first, and we shared some stories about her experiences with patients, and then we came to a Christmas dinner, and at that time I was asked if I would be interested in volunteering as a courier, not as a patient companion, and once a week, and I said, yeah, why not, because I was already retired. And so I did, and then after several months, I was asked if I would take the training just for the courier position, but it was involved the patient companions, and it was just half a course, basically. I did, and after that, they said, well, you want to continue on? I said, I don't know. Yeah, I'll do it. So I did, and at the end, I had that wonderful feeling like, wow, I could help make a difference. However, I wasn't sure how I could handle that.
Right.
As most volunteers feel when they first start. With encouragement from Rosie and some other volunteers, I started. It was a great experience. And I did feel like I was helping the patients. So I continued on, and I asked to work with male patients, only because I saw how many male volunteers there were, very few compared to the ladies, even though the ladies do a great job, don't get me wrong. But men sometimes need a guy just to BS with and have a nice conversation. So I did. It's been great. I also have had some women who I've been a patient companion with, and that was okay too. but I primarily have gentlemen, and we've been doing this for 10 years, my wife says, and it's been a good experience, and one that we're tickled that we have been involved.
Thank you. I appreciate the history. And again, I've heard these stories in other contexts, but when I think about when Caring Presence as a vigil service came on board, it was about halfway through your 10 years. And so I'm wondering if, before we dive into the details of the vigil volunteer assignments, if you could say a little bit about what you've learned from, for lack of a better phrase, regular patient companion assignments that kind of prepared you for the Caring Presence Vigil. I mean, and all of the different people that you've been assigned to, that you've visited with. How has that been? Things that might come to mind? Stories? What have you learned from those first 5 years of patient care?
Well, we saw with, Rosie had mentioned her mother was in the hospice program. And during that period, she was at our home. And we had experience with hospice nurses and staff. And we saw how great it was.
Right.
Then, as she was passing and she went into the hospice facility, we again saw how they took care of them and how they offered us opportunities to visit with her, not just in the room, but in the whole cycle of things. And it was really encouraging. No one likes to think about a dying process. No one is really comfortable with that. We all have our drawbacks in that situation.
Right.
But we saw the good in it, and we thought if we could possibly help patients in the dying process and their families, which is also extremely important, that's something that maybe we can do. So we volunteered.
Right.
And the initial experience was great.
Wonderful.
Rosie?
Well, for me, most of my patients have been elderly from the beginning.
Right.
And very actually vocal, even though a lot of them had dementia. And I would ask them questions and zero in on something that maybe they like to do.
Okay.
Like, I had a woman that couldn't bake a cake if she had to, but she sure could make a peach pie. And she told me every week because I asked her every week.
Nice.
And the conversation was always the same, but that does, for some reason, that doesn't bother me.
Okay.
And we relived it for them, or I relived it with them week after week after week, many of the women patients that I had. And just briefly, I wasn't afraid of them.
Right.
And when we got into Caring Presence, I wasn't afraid of the dying person either. And that's been a gift. Because I know a lot of people are.
Right.
So,
right.
But just sitting with them and talking week after week after week, month after month, and sometimes after a couple of years.
Sure.
I also was with a few of my patients who were starting the dying process. And I didn't shy away from that. I stayed there with them anyway, even though they couldn't communicate.
Right.
And so not knowing, that really led me into when this service came about.
Okay. And I think back to that time, and the two of you were part of an inaugural class of Caring Presence Vigil interested volunteers who had already had some significant patient companion experience under their belts. And so we gathered people together, and I think at the time we might have had upward to 20 people at that first meeting who knew that this was something important to provide. It's often called 11th hour in some hospices, and not a ding to them, but that sounds so much like a state of execution. I think vigil or caring tends to capture it a little better for me. But here we are in our fifth year, or starting our fifth year of providing this service, and our numbers come and go. I would say we don't have 20 people right now. And I guess one of the shameless reasons for wanting to focus on this particular service in this podcast is to encourage people to consider it. We would love to have more folk interested in sitting with people who are actively dying. And I know for the people listening, one of the criteria, if you will, to activate a caring presence companion is that the person be in the active dying process, not needing crisis care. All of those steps to keep them, managed on their symptoms has been taken care of. Now this person is simply moving through that normal, natural process of dying, but would otherwise have no one to sit with them. And so that's one of the criteria. Another one is that we've got people that can help, but that maybe the family isn't quite ready to face that moment by themselves. And I think you have had both kinds of settings where you've gone with patients who have had no family, and you've gone to sit with patients who maybe have had family, but you've provided a little bit of an emotional shock absorber. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about those experiences and the difference between the two, why it's still valuable that you're there.
Well, I certainly don't want anybody to die alone, whatever their circumstances.
Right.
It just doesn't seem right to me.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I say, it didn't frighten me to be with them. And I actually sat with a gentleman who passed while I was sitting there.
Oh, okay.
And I always talk to them, always touch them, hold their hand. And, it's said that they can hear you.
Yes.
And I truly, truly believe that. Truly, absolutely. I've been known to say a prayer or two out loud.
Okay.
And they'll squeeze my hand or try to open their eyes and look to see real quick who's there. Often tell them they're not alone.
Wonderful.
And just once, and that was recently, when I walked in, another woman walked in with me. I wasn't sure who she was, but it ended up being the patient's wife. And I thought, well, I'll go ahead and leave. Oh, no, please stay. So I sat with her, and that's what she needed.
Right.
She talked nonstop for about an hour and a half. I mean, nonstop. And which was a good thing. And I basically hardly said anything. She just needed to vent and get some things out. And when other family members came in, that's when I thought I would leave. And that's what happened there. But that was about the only time we've had contact with patients' family. One other time we did. They were going to leave for a gathering they were going to, and decided not to. So when we drove all the way to Somerset, Ohio, there was the family, which was fine, and we stayed and visited with them.
Right. Wonderful.
Along with talking with the patient.
How precious that is. And I'm sure they didn't expect that. My guess is that as you imagine this, you really do picture in your mind the isolated patient, the patient with no connections at all, and yet here's something else that we're willing to do. And I know, Rick, you had said how important it is for the families as well.
Yeah, and indeed, the families, it's surprising their reaction to our being there. And it's always been a very positive thing from their standpoint. And like Rosie said, whether they need just to talk, and they may talk about the family history.
Right.
They may have some funny stories. It's very moving to see people do that as opposed to the typical movie scene that you see where there's wailing and gnashing of teeth.
Right.
It's very positive, and it more or less helps complete the life cycle of the good times in those families. And we're tickled to be able to be a part of that and help that along. If nobody has no one to talk to, they're having a difficult time. They will have a difficult time, but we do provide that. But the important thing is for the patient, and like Rosie said, we've heard that even though they may be unconscious, they do hear
Yes, they do.
We believe that, and we try and keep that positive. And myself, I volunteer for late hours because most of the volunteers, again, are ladies, and they don't like to be out late at night.
That makes sense.
I'm up late anyway.
Sure.
So I usually take the 10, 12 o'clock shifts
Okay.
when no one else dares go out. And it's a help, and it helps to complete the overall coverage with that patient.
Right, right. And I think that's something, as we were building this theoretically before we actually launched the program, we tried to imagine what was going to be the most helpful structure. And so for our listeners, how we work this is once we receive word that a caring presence companion is wanted and needed, our resource center or our on-call staff are going to start placing the calls to the volunteers on the list. You as volunteers have a way that you can write down, it's an assignment information form, and so you write down everything that you need, the location, if it's in a facility, how you would get in after hours with a code so that the staff knows that you're coming, and then anything in particular that you would need to know about that patient, maybe what music they like, what faith they practice, etc. And then we try to schedule shifts 4 deep, meaning if we can have 4 consecutive shifts of 4 hours each, that gives us a nice bit of 16-hour coverage until we can see where the patient is. And sometimes the patient will pass early on. We've had activations that have gone on for 36 hours where we just have continuous coverage. And I think in that one, we only had 1 block of time that wasn't covered, which says an awful lot about the willingness of people like you to keep in there and to keep vigilant. Because there's no timeline on it. There's no predicting it, even though we can kind of get an idea. Some people will hang on for whatever reason, and I'm sure you've seen that. So that's a little bit about the logistics in the background that way. I've also heard, and I think you folks too have seen an awful lot in hospice, that maybe people can kind of choose how they're going to die. And we've all heard stories here, and I'm sure you have too, about people waiting until certain family members are there before they pass, or waiting until certain family members leave the room before they pass. And I wonder if you've seen any of that in your vigil assignments or just in your patient companion assignments.
My mother did that.
Oh, really? Okay.
I think I was with her for 8 hours straight, and then talked to her and said, "Mom, I'm going to step out in the hallway for a few minutes."
Right.
And came back in, and she was gone.
And she had
You know, I don't know. That's a tough thing. I don't know that they can do that. You know, choose their time of dying.
Right.
Maybe when the family leaves, they might say, "Dad, we're going to stop and get a bite to eat. We'll be right back."
Right.
And then it gets real quiet
Oh, okay.
and serene, and they may just take their last deep breath and just, let it go.
Right.
That also happens when you're sitting there. That happened to me before.
Okay.
So that's a tricky one. I don't know about that. But I think more often than not, they do pass when you've left the room.
Right.
So
Right.
there may be something there, but I'm just not sure of that.
And a
That's
not
a
sure
tough
is
one.
perfectly okay.
Yeah.
I don't think we could definitively land on that, but I've heard so much about no one should die alone, but some people want to die alone. And so somewhere in between that, I think we will always offer the best of what we have and support, which is presence, which is why we call it caring presence. But at the same time, to be aware that there's that unanticipated possibility that anything could happen, and to have people like you who are open to that is really wonderful. What do you think, Rick?
Well, I've had the opinion that we get more calls for being involved in caring presence right after the holidays.
Oh.
And it just seems to me, as most people are trying to be together with their loved ones, Christmas,
Right.
Easter, whatever it may be, and after that has happened, then they're ready to, the old story, they're ready to go.
Sure.
We've had a busy season the last couple of months, and Of course, it's been right after the holidays. So I strongly feel that, but that's just, my opinion. The other thing, you were talking about volunteers being called to participate. Rosie and I have had situations where we've had 2 or 3 calls in a row,
Right.
spread over maybe 3 or 4 weeks, where we couldn't participate. And you know what? We felt bad.
I know you. I know you.
I
do.
mean, oh my. But we had something going on, and
Right.
we weren't able to participate. Other thing is, you mentioned 4 hours. If you can't do 4 hours,
Right.
say so. And the people making the calls, setting up the volunteers can make some adjustments. You won't be turned down.
Exactly.
And we've also, I shared with Rosie a situation just a few weeks ago where I relieved a lady in the Caring Presence program with a patient. And we had met, but that's all. We recognized each other. And she mentioned during the changeover that she's relatively new. And she said, I want to tell you, the reason I volunteered for this is hearing Rosie and yours experiences. And I thought I'd try.
Very good.
And I now have relieved her twice.
Wow.
And Rosie once. She's become very involved and very enthusiastic in helping the program.
Wonderful. When we come back, we're going to pick up where we left off with the conversation about not just Caring Presence, but patient companion in general. This is Liz Adamschick, Manager of Volunteer Services with Hospice of Central Ohio, and you're listening to our Listen and Learn podcast interview with Rick and Rosie Rieser. It's a new year, and at Hospice of Central Ohio, that means new opportunities to support our patients and families. From playing music, to providing pet therapy, to working with veterans, there are people in our care who need your active listening skills, your smile, and your compassion. We're also looking for people to help staff our events, work in one of our office locations, and help educate the community about all the services that Hospice of Central Ohio provides. So visit our website at www.hospiceofcentralohio.org and click on the volunteers link to learn more, or give me a call at 740-788-1404. Help us make 2018 even more precious and meaningful for the people we serve. And we're back with Rick and Rosie Rieser. This is Liz Adamschick, Manager of Volunteer Services with Hospice of Central Ohio, and you're listening to one of our Listen and Learn podcasts. Before the break, we were talking a little bit about whether or not people pass by choice or by chance or by circumstance, and I certainly would not expect anybody to have a definitive answer there. However, I know that we have so many stories that we've collected, and it's not at all unusual to be in a conversation here with the paid staff, with the volunteer staff, and folks just chime in and say, oh yeah, this is what happened. My father didn't pass until I left the room, or my uncle waited until his son came in from Afghanistan, and fill in the blank. So I want to make sure that we leave some room for that mystery, for that little bit of, hey, nobody really knows, but the most important thing that we provide, I think, is that presence and that availability, which is what you do. So with our Caring Presence Vigil program coming into its 5th year, we know that the volunteer attendance and the count on that position ebbs and flows. So we really want to inform and educate people in the community about this service, so that if they think that might be something they'd like to do, they would certainly be able to contact volunteer services and get the process started. What would you say to people in general who might be a bit hesitant to take on such a role? Who might say, oh, I don't think I could do that, it's too hard or it's too emotional. What advice might you give some new volunteer applicants who are kind of on the fence or not sure that they can can manage a situation like that?
Well, in the 5 years I've been doing it, I don't have any horror stories. They are definitely in the active dying process. It's not scary at all.
Okay.
I always introduce myself, touch the patient. If I don't have direct skin contact, I touch them through the sheet.
Okay.
Sometimes wipe the brow. It's so hot in the room. Sometime, cool them down. Tell them who I am. They're not alone, and I'm going to stay with you for a while. I bring other reading material for myself. I don't sing and dance, so I don't do the music part.
Sure.
But every once in a while, I'll just stand up and talk to them, and there's not much of a response. And so I think I would just reassure them that it's not frightening, that there's nothing scary about it. If you've got time to sit, usually the chairs are not comfortable.
Okay.
Bring something to drink, something to eat, something to read.
Definitely.
And if it's something that is not for them, they would know after the first or second time.
Right.
It's something they could just say, this isn't for me.
Right.
I'll do something else for hospice. So.
And wonderful. Have you ever sung to a patient, Rick? Have you had the chance?
Fortunately for the patient, no. I'm like Rosie. How she explained it pretty much sums up things. I would encourage potential caring present volunteers that if they are unsure about how to handle things, hospice does offer a program where volunteers do, upon occasion, mentor,
Yes.
and we could go with a new person to help them through the unknown, so to speak, and maybe answer questions on the spot, which may be helpful and may enable them to continue on with the program. We feel it's really an important program with hospice, and if we can assist that in becoming more popular, it's a win-win situation for the patient and the family.
Definitely. As you've been talking and I've been listening, I don't hear anything but joy in you. I don't hear apprehension. And I think for some people, the image of volunteering for hospice comes with so much mythology. Oh, it's depressing. It's sad. I don't know how you do that. You're an angel, etc. Now that you've been doing this for 10 years, how do you see, what you expected hospice volunteering to be like match what you've actually experienced?
I didn't expect anything. I didn't know what to expect.
Okay.
So I think
enough.
I came in a blank sheet of paper, truly.
Okay.
And didn't know about the first visit, what that was going to be like or anything.
Right.
And now I still don't have any expectations. It's just a joy to meet with them and talk with them. Now this is people not in the active dying process.
Right.
So many different stories and experiences. That's what I just love. And I've laughed and actually cried with so many patients.
Right.
They tell you things about their life history that I think if their family knew, they might not approve.
Okay.
But they trust us. They come to trust us.
Good word.
And feel comfortable in, at least me, I don't know about Rick, but
Right.
telling me things that, serious things in their family, their whole family history. They're growing up to the time where they are now in their life. It's such a treasure to hear something like that. And they just go on, and a lot of times the famous thing I hear is, I'm ready to go. I don't know why I'm still here.
Really?
That is something I've heard more and more often. I just don't know why I'm still here. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to see my mom and dad, my husband, my children, whatever.
Right.
And they truly mean it, and they don't say it with tears in their eyes. They say it that I've done, lived my life, and I'm ready to go. So I've not experienced younger patients.
Okay.
So don't have that experience where someone doesn't want to pass.
Right.
And so I don't know how I would be in that situation.
Right. Well, and you had mentioned crying with your patients, and I hear that too from folks that are hesitant. Oh, I'd be so afraid, I'm such a crybaby. And I guess I'd want to take advantage of this opportunity with you here to remind our listeners and certainly the community that it's not our expectation that you come in with no heart, or that you come in with a heart that you can keep under control. For me personally, I think, we need to find a balance between becoming too emotional with our patients or too attached, and also wanting to remind them that they still have the ability, even with their condition, even with their illness, to touch another human being's heart. And I would think that that would add a quality of life, that they can see that it isn't just about me and my medical condition, but to move someone to tears, what a privilege, what a gift. And to be able to do that. So we don't want to say no crybabies need apply. We want to make sure that folks know we're here to support you, but at the same time, know that it's okay. I know our clinical staff has cried with our patients, and there's plenty to be moved by, and there's also plenty to laugh about and laugh with. So I'm glad that you brought that up as a both and experience and not an either or.
And I'll just add one thing to that.
Please.
This whole experience, starting from my mother through the 10 years, these patients have opened my heart and opened my soul. And it hasn't closed. And as long as it's open, I think we'll continue with this program.
Wonderful. Rick, do you want to weigh in on that? I can see you thinking. I know our listeners can't see you thinking, but I can see you thinking.
Yeah, it's unusual, to say the least. My experiences with patient companion role is, as Rosie said quite well, an opportunity for them to reminisce, not just the good things, but some of the tough things, and do it just kind of off the wall. You never know, you never expect what they're going to say.
Right.
And it isn't that you're shocked as much as you're listening. And, a typical human trait is we all like to talk. And quite frankly, we all like to talk about ourselves and our experiences. And allowing them to share that and honestly listen to them, is dynamite. I mean, you can see it in them that they appreciate it. And the same way with the family members, the caregivers, they have issues. And when we first go into patients and there's a caregiver, and I'm in homes mostly.
Okay.
The caregiver initially isn't too sure about the patient companion, me in particular. So they have to get to know me, and it may take 3 visits. But then all of a sudden, well, I'm going to run some errands, or I'm going to go have lunch with my friend, or any number of things. And they feel confident leaving their loved one with a patient companion. And it's to the point where I think they really look forward to that time of allowing them to get away from the situation and regenerate a little bit.
Right. Right, and I'm glad you bring that up, and something else that you mentioned. There's so much to talk about, and we only have 6 hours. I'm kidding. We have a little time here. They do need time to get to know you as caregivers. They do need time to trust you, and you had brought up trust, Rosie, and that's really the cornerstone of our relationship in the community, with people who send their loved ones here, or who make referrals, with people who let us come and educate them. It all pivots back to trust, and so to know that that doesn't happen overnight, or that it's not just assumed, that because you're hospice, that means that right off the bat I can go down the hall and take a nap. People need to build that relationship so that they can understand what you're going to do, and that it's okay for them to go take care of themselves. That takes a while. And if you've ever been a caregiver, you know what that's like, to step aside and let somebody else drive, so to speak. That part's really important. So I'm glad that you brought that up. I know that, Rosie, you tend to do more patients in facilities, with a few exceptions, and Rick, you tend to do more home patients. I'm wondering if each of you could talk about the differences between those settings, because I would imagine that they are subtle, but also important. The difference between serving a patient in a facility as opposed to a private home, what that looks like. And maybe some things you've noticed.
And I don't know how it came about that my assignments were primarily in facilities, but it's perfectly all right.
Sure.
Not only do you see your patient, but you see everybody else that's in the facility.
Right.
And I have sat with many a patient who are eating lunchtime.
Oh, right.
Lunchtime. And so I get to know the other people even at the table. Observe how they're treated in a facility. Always, and I've had good luck with that.
Okay.
I'm seeing one in a facility, and I have a patient at home
Okay.
now.
Okay.
And she's 90 years old and doing tremendously well, and I honestly look for her to get out of the program.
Okay.
Because she's so self-sufficient,
Wonderful.
and working on her own. But the difference is more intimate in the home.
Okay.
You don't have all the distractions of the other people around you, and the buzzers going and the bells dinging and people walking up and down the hall,
Right.
and that type of thing.
Okay.
Usually if they know I'm in their room with them, they'll shut the door and let us alone for a couple of hours.
Okay.
They don't come in unless it's time for medication, that kind of thing.
Right.
But I've had some good times around the lunch table, I can tell you.
I'll bet. And I'm glad that that's a part of your experience. Just by contrast, you're right, the home is a bit more intimate. I think we forget that meals are social times for us. And if we have trouble eating, or if we're in a facility where maybe our ability to do most of our activities of daily living is diminished, we still need that social time around food, because that's so much a part of our upbringing and our culture. And it's easy to see mealtime for someone who's declining from a terminal illness as just something mechanical or just going through the motions. And they may take twice as long to eat a meal as they used to, but when they have someone to talk to, when you can bring up other subjects as they're trying to eat, maybe that can make it a little bit easier. I don't know, but...
And I've tried to encourage the patients to have conversations with the other table mates, with the other people around the table.
Sure.
And have been kind of successful in doing that.
Oh.
Have them interact, because you can see the people around you, they're just eating and they're not talking to anyone.
Right.
And so I've tried to encourage that conversation between my patient and the other people sitting at the table. And it really does work if someone's there encouraging the conversation.
Absolutely. Rick, what about your home assignments? Have you done facilities? I'm embarrassed to say
Yes.
I forget.
Yes.
Okay.
I have, and I share the experiences Rosie talked about, because many of my experiences in the nursing homes were at lunchtime.
Okay.
And one time at dinner. And it's amazing when you encourage people to talk with each other. It doesn't take long for them to get the idea, and you get to the point where I didn't have to say anything. They were
Right.
talking among themselves, and I thought that was a real plus.
Definitely.
But at home, and I usually have a patient around lunchtime, and some will eat and some won't. They share those experiences with the caregiver, if that person's still there, or just you. And the nice thing is they have a lot of memorabilia at home
sure.
that it doesn't take long for them to start dragging out pictures and notes and
Wonderful.
letters and books. And in most cases, they turn the TV off.
Nice.
So you see that and it's just a minor thing, taking the remote and turning it off, but it solidifies the idea that your visit time with them is important, and they've got somebody to share with.
Wonderful.
And so I enjoy that. I have a lot of funny stories. I have a few heartbreakers and tearjerkers too, but it's amazing when folks start reminiscing about whether it be their childhood or their early marriage or later marriage, whatever it may be. They're having fun, and they love to see your reaction.
Yes.
Really, they do. And some wonderful experiences over the years. And everybody's different. You know, you never have two patients the same way.
Right.
And it doesn't take long to get to know them and get to know what turns them on and gets them talking and gets them involved. And that's the fun part.
Absolutely. And I would imagine that people look forward to your visits, both the caregiver, the facility staff, certainly the patient, if they're aware. But I know sometimes, Rosie, for your patients that are struggling with dementia, it's a first visit every time you go. But imagine a caregiver who knows that on Wednesday, I'm going to get a little bit of a break, and I look forward to it. I plan my week around it, and whether or not, you know, my loved one in the bed is going to be awake or not, you've got someone anticipating you. How does that feel? How does that make you feel to know that people look forward to your presence?
That's the plus. You know, I mean, really, we like to be acknowledged and have patients look forward to seeing you. Just like any of our own family members, you know, it's a joy. But so many of the caregivers, as I said earlier, use that opportunity to get away, and you spend some one-on-one time.
Right.
Which I honestly think they understand how important that is for the patient. And initially, they'll come home and they'll say, "How did so-and-so do?" Great.
Right.
And I would tease, I said, "We just barely got home before you did." You
Right, right.
But everybody gets a chuckle out of that. And it's precious time. It's hard to give all of the, talk about all the experiences that we've had. I'll say with Rosie, you know, as Rosie said, almost all of them are positive.
Wonderful.
If there were a lot of negatives, we probably wouldn't be doing this.
Exactly.
They're all positive.
So how do you know that you're making a difference? I know you volunteer on Wednesdays for hospice, and that's your hospice day. At the end of a Wednesday, how do you know that you're making a difference in the lives of the people that you visit?
From my experience, again, mostly in the home, but it's happened in the facilities, is, am I going to see you next Wednesday?
Wonderful.
Bingo. I mean, that's pretty simple, but am I going to see you next Wednesday? Same time? Yeah.
Right.
There have been some instances where I've been asked to stay on a little bit longer. That's okay.
Sure.
Unless I have an appointment with another patient, you know, that won't allow me to do that. But and I tell them, you know, if you need some additional time, let me know. And we'll make it work. And they're very appreciative of that.
And I have a patient that says, "Okay, I'll see you again another time. You can go now." And, you know, I might be there 20 minutes.
Right.
And she's absolutely finished. She wants to sleep or do something else. And you can't take that personal.
No.
But I've had patients say, "Oh, it must be Wednesday."
Yeah.
Here's Rosie the Riveter. I always say I'm Rosie the Riveter because the older patients can relate to that time era, you know, in the world. And it's something that it's catchy and they, you know, they remember.
Sure.
And I had a woman that I read the Bible to. She wanted me specifically, which was very difficult for me because she was of another religion and some of the words in the Bible were tongue twisters for me.
Okay.
And I couldn't get them out.
Right.
And so
Right.
she would say the quote herself.
She would help you.
She knew
Sure.
that Bible front and back, and say, now don't forget to come next week because I have a different section of that Bible I want you to read.
Wow.
So if they don't have serious dementia or Alzheimer's, they know you're coming.
Yes, they do.
Even if they don't know the day of the week, they know you're coming. And sometimes they know the day of the week. Oh, it must be Wednesday.
Wonderful.
There you are.
Well, that's really important because patients have a lot of idle time on their hands.
Yes, they do.
Whereas we may be busy most of the time. And when you have all that idle time drags on and they can become bored. God only knows what goes through their mind, but having something to look forward to, like us when we were young and looking for Christmas,
Sure.
is pretty important. And
Right.
sometimes we fail to realize that. But it's a big time for them. They may only have 1 or 2 visitors a week.
Good point.
And they're very appreciative.
Oh my.
We'll
Oh,
vocalize it. Very appreciative. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. I know, you don't, and it doesn't have to be Wednesday for us. It
Right.
just falls that way. We
Sure.
certainly volunteer other days of the week too. So,
Well, and I think you bring something else up too, in and around your experience. I try to imagine what it would be like for the bulk of my conversations to be of a medical nature. And it's easy to imagine myself only as a person with a disease, only as a person with a condition. In come Rick and Rosie or any of our other patient companions, and it really isn't your purpose to talk more about their medical condition unless they want to. But if you can provide them with another opportunity to tell stories that kind of keep their lives bigger than their diagnosis, I think that's such a sacred thing. I don't think it's just a nice thing. I think that's powerful to remind people that they are more than their illnesses, that they are more than their symptoms, and to put them in touch with times that help round out who they are as people, and that we try to see that. I don't think I'd want to talk about my medical condition 24/7, but if you come and interrupt that flow in the course of a week, how lovely. How lovely that is.
yeah, and I don't talk to them about their medical condition.
Good for you.
Yeah.
I mean, I know
unless
what
they
it says
want to, right?
in the information I'm given, but, I don't have any
Right.
experience to talk about that.
It only
Right.
comes up if they want to talk about
I
it.
do ask them, are you in any pain?
Right, right.
And they'll say, most of the time they say no.
Okay.
Now, they
great.
could have just had medication, I don't
Sure,
know.
sure.
Or maybe they don't take medication for pain.
It could be.
I do ask that. Are you in any pain? Do you need anything? Can I do anything for you? Can I get you something? And the answer is usually no. Just sit here and be with me, talk to me.
Just visit.
Yeah.
How do you think you have grown and changed in the last 10 years because of your volunteering with people who are at end of life?
Well, I know my listening skills have have gotten better, except at home.
Except at home, okay. You can only give so much at
Right.
the end of the day, okay.
That's true. The listening skills and listening to the stories that I know that I'm not unique in my own way, I mean, there's so many stories out there that just drive me on, that I just love them. And some I've passed on to other friends, they don't know who I'm talking about.
Right.
And I won't personalize it. That touch me, that could touch some other people.
Right.
And having the responsibility each week to do something has been good for me. Something to look forward to. I look forward to the patient companion meetings because I love to hear them talk about their experiences. They may say something I never thought of.
Right.
And I take away with me. I always try to write it down.
Good for you.
You?
Well, it's amazing the favorable payback I get out of all these experiences. And I'll share one which has really been a highlight with me. I had a patient a few years ago. for probably 8 or 9 months before he passed away. Again, when I first started, I had to prove myself to his wife, the caregiver, before she would leave. And finally, she would leave and do her things, and I would be there. And we talked about a variety of things, the patient and I, a variety of things, and they were all great. And a lot of laughs and, some serious times. But he passed away, and then time goes on, and it was 2 years later. We were doing a hospice
information at
one of the churches.
Oh, sure.
In Newark, and we volunteered to do that. And as we were closing up at the end and putting things away and getting ready to leave, this lady comes up to me and she says, "Do you know who I am?" And I looked at her. I recognized the face, but I couldn't remember the name.
Right.
She says, "You took care of my husband so-and-so." And she had a friend with her, a gal. And she said, "This is the fellow that I was telling you about who was so nice to my husband."
Oh.
Wow. I mean,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
out of the blue. So time marches on, another year and a half, 2 years. We're at the Hartford Fair, Rosie and I, and we're in one of the buildings, and I sat down and we were talking, and this gal came up and she says, "I recognized your voice."
Oh,
It was
my.
the same gal.
Oh, wow.
And she's doing very well. And again, she said, "Thank you." And I thought, I mean, I didn't do much.
Right.
But yes, I did.
But yes, you did.
And it was appreciated. And
Definitely.
that was worth more than anything that, whether it be money or gifts or anything like that. I mean, that's nothing. It's the fact that we did make a difference.
Wonderful. And what a lovely place for us to end our conversation for now, but to always put "to be continued," because I know as long as the two of you volunteer, you will be collecting more stories, you'll be gathering more insights, and we're grateful for that. So thank you for joining us today. You've been listening to the Listen and Learn podcast with Liz Adamschick, Manager of Volunteer Services here at Hospice of Central Ohio, and our guests today, patient companions and caring presence vigil volunteers, Rick and Rosie Rieser. If any of this has sounded interesting to you or you'd like to ask questions about volunteer opportunities, please visit our website at www.hospiceofcentralohio.org, or you can give me a call directly at 740-788-1404. I would be happy to talk with you about how you can get involved and support the people in our care. Thank you so much. Join us again next time.